When I was cleaning out my late husband's garage, I found an envelope. For my wife, don't show our son. Inside was a key to a bank safe deposit box and an address. I immediately went to that address. What I found inside made me— Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. I had been married to Walter Hayes for 41 years, and I thought I knew every corner of that man's soul. We met in the autumn of 1974 at a church potluck in Dayton, Ohio. He brought deviled eggs wrapped in aluminum foil and wore a flannel shirt that was slightly too big for him. I remember thinking he looked like a man who fixed things, the kind who kept spare bolts in his pockets and never raised his voice. I was right on both counts. Walter fixed everything: the leaky faucet, the cracked porch step, the silences after arguments. He was steady in the way a good oak tree is steady. You don't think about the roots until the storm comes. We raised our son Derek in a yellow house on Millbrook Lane. 3 bedrooms, a vegetable garden out back, a Ford in the driveway. Nothing extravagant. Walter worked for 30 years at an industrial supply company, rising slowly from warehouse floor to regional manager. I taught 2nd grade until my knees gave out. We were comfortable, not wealthy, but comfortable. We took vacations to the lake. We argued about the thermostat. We slow danced in the kitchen on New Year's Eve. It was a good life. An ordinary, good life. Walter died on a Tuesday in March. Congestive heart failure. He had been declining for 8 months, and by the end, he knew it was coming. I was holding his hand when he went. Derek was in the parking lot, taking a phone call from his wife, Kaylee. I never forgot that. The grief was not the sharp, screaming kind. It was more like fog, thick and cold and everywhere. I moved through the following weeks on autopilot: thank you cards, casserole dishes returned, the slow rearranging of a life built for 2. It was in early May, 2 months after the funeral, that I finally got to the garage. Walter had been a careful man, and his garage reflected that. Pegboards with outlined tool silhouettes, labeled shelves, coffee cans sorted by screw size. I was going through the metal cabinet in the far corner, the one that smelled like WD-40 and old newspapers, when I found it tucked behind a box of tax records from the 1990s. A plain white envelope. My name written on the front in Walter's careful block letters. For my wife. Do not show our son. I stood there for a long moment in the dusty light. My hands, I noticed, were completely still. I should tell you that in the weeks since Walter died, Derek and Kaylee had already begun circling. It started subtly, the way these things always do. Derek mentioned twice that he and Kaylee were stretched thin financially, and that Dad had always said he'd help when the time came. Kaylee asked, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, whether I'd thought about downsizing. They offered to help me go through Walter's paperwork together. When I suggested I could manage on my own, there was a pause on the phone that lasted just a beat too long. I had chalked it up to grief making everyone strange, to Derek's anxiety, which had always expressed itself as control. I had given them the benefit of the doubt the way I always had, the way mothers do, until the doubt becomes too heavy to carry. But now I was holding an envelope that my husband of 41 years had hidden from his own son. I didn't open it in the garage. Something told me not to. Some old instinct, the kind that makes you close curtains before turning on a lamp. I went inside, locked the back door, sat down at the kitchen table where Walter and I had eaten 10,000 breakfasts, and opened the envelope slowly, like it might startle. Inside was a handwritten note, brief and precise the way Walter always was, and beneath it, a small brass key and a slip of paper with a name and address. First Merchant Trust, 4480 Claremont Avenue, Branch Manager Robert Ellison. A safe deposit box, Walter had a safe deposit box I knew nothing about. I read the note twice, then a third time. Then I sat very still for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum and the distant sound of a lawnmower. And I thought, how long? How long did you carry this alone? And then a colder thought, the one I couldn't push away. What exactly were you protecting me from? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed Walter and I had shared for 30 years, on my side, staring at the ceiling. And I ran through everything I thought I knew. I thought about our finances, the joint checking account, the modest savings, the life insurance policy I had already filed. All accounted for, all ordinary. Walter had been meticulous about money the way he was meticulous about everything. No surprises, no extravagance, no debt. We had lived within our means, and I had never questioned it, because there had never been reason to. But now, there was a key on my nightstand. I got up at 4 in the morning, made coffee I didn't taste, and sat at the kitchen table with Walter's note spread flat in front of me. I read it again in the low light. Margaret, he had written. He always called me Margaret when he was being serious, never Margie. There are things I should have told you sooner. I was wrong to wait. Everything in this box is yours, and yours alone. Please speak to Robert Ellison before you speak to anyone else, especially Derek. I love you. I'm sorry it took me so long to be brave enough. W. Brave enough. Walter, who had never flinched from anything, who had sat with me through 2 miscarriages and a cancer scare and the slow loss of his own father to dementia. Walter had needed courage to tell me something. That single phrase frightened me more than anything else in the letter. I thought about Derek. My son was 52 years old, broad-shouldered, with Walter's jaw and none of Walter's patience. As a boy, he had been sweet, truly sweet, the kind of child who cried at sad movies and remembered to call on birthdays. But somewhere in his 30s, after he married Kaylee, something had shifted. She was not a cruel woman exactly. She was a strategic one. She came from money that had dried up, and she had married Derek, I suspected, as a long-term investment. Over the years, I had watched her slowly reshape my son, his priorities, his language, his loyalties. He no longer called just to talk. He called when he needed something. I hated that I was thinking this. I hated that my husband's secret was forcing me to count up losses I had refused to count before. But here was the accounting. 2 months since Walter's death. And already Derek had asked me 4 times about the estate. He had used that word, estate, as though our yellow house on Millbrook Lane were a country manor. He had mentioned, casually, that he'd spoken to a financial advisor who suggested that consolidating assets might be wise for a widow my age. He had offered to connect me with a lawyer friend of Kaylee's who could help me understand my options. Each offer presented as concern, each one landing like a hand reaching for something that wasn't his yet. I thought, he doesn't know about the box, but he suspects there is something to find. That thought was the thing that steadied me. If Derek had already known, if Walter had told him, or if he had found the key himself, the box would likely already be empty. The fact that he was still circling meant he was operating on instinct, not information. I had something he didn't. I had the key, and I had Walter's warning. By 6 in the morning, I had made 3 decisions. The first, I would go to First Merchant Trust alone. Not with Derek, not with anyone Derek had suggested. I would ask for Robert Ellison by name, as Walter had instructed, and I would not mention the visit to anyone until I understood what I was dealing with. The second, I would call my own attorney, not Kaylee's friend, mine. Her name was Patricia Odom, a woman I had known since our children were in the same Sunday school class, a woman who had handled our original wills 20 years ago and who I trusted completely. I had not called her since Walter's death because I had assumed there was nothing complicated to handle. That assumption was over. The third decision was quieter and harder. I decided that until I understood what was in that box and why Walter had hidden it, I would tell Derek nothing. I would be warm. I would be the grieving mother he expected. But I would not be transparent. Not yet. Was it deception? Maybe. But Walter had kept a secret for reasons I didn't yet understand, and he had specifically, deliberately asked me to keep it too. He had known Derek's nature better than anyone. He had loved him and still written, "Do not show our son." That told me everything I needed to know about the danger I was in. I poured the cold coffee down the drain, got dressed in my good slacks and a blue blouse, and put the key in the inside pocket of my purse. Then I sat down and waited for the bank to open. First Merchant Trust was a quiet bank on Claremont Avenue, the kind with marble floors and low voices and potted ferns that looked like they'd been there since the Nixon administration. I arrived when the doors opened at 9. I asked the young woman at the front desk for Robert Ellison and watched her expression shift. Not dramatically, just a small adjustment. The look of someone who has been told to expect a particular visitor. She said she'd let him know I was there and asked me to take a seat. Robert Ellison was perhaps 60, trim, with silver-rimmed glasses, and the careful courtesy of a man who dealt regularly in other people's private matters. He shook my hand and led me back through a side corridor to a small office that smelled of old paper and clean carpet. He closed the door. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I'm glad you came. Walter told me you would eventually. He said you might take a few months, that you'd need time." "You knew him," I said. It wasn't a question. He opened the box 11 years ago. He came in once a year, sometimes twice. We'd have coffee. He folded his hands on the desk. He was a private man, but he trusted you. He said so every time. 11 years. I absorbed that. For 11 years, Walter had made quiet trips to this bank on Claremont Avenue, and I had not known. The safe deposit box was larger than I expected. Robert Ellison led me to the vault room and left me alone with it, as is customary. I set it on the table and opened the lid. What I found inside required me to sit down. There were 3 items. The first was a bound ledger, handwritten in Walter's meticulous block print, documenting a series of investments made beginning in 2003. I recognized some of the names: mutual funds, a rental property in Indiana I had never heard of, modest stock positions in companies whose names I associated with Walter's offhand reading habits, page after page of entries, each dated, each totaled. The final sum, updated in January of the year Walter died, was listed in plain numbers at the bottom of the last page: $437,000. I read it again, then again. My hands were not steady this time. The second item was a manila folder containing the deed to the Indiana property, a small rental house in Terre Haute, generating income that had been routed to a separate account I had never seen. The account was in my name and Walter's. But the statements showed the address for correspondence had been listed as a P.O. box I didn't recognize. The third item was a sealed letter addressed to me, separate from the one I'd found in the garage. This one was longer. I won't reproduce every word. Some of it is too private. But the substance was this. Walter had built this quietly, over decades, for one reason. He had watched Derek change after he married Kaylee. He had watched the way Kaylee approached money as something to be extracted, managed, redirected. He had watched his son become her instrument. And he had come to fear, slowly and painfully, that if the full extent of their savings were known, it would not be safe. Not in the hands of 2 people who had already begun to treat their inheritance as a right rather than a gift. He had not hidden it from me. He had hidden it through me, kept it safe by keeping it invisible, to be revealed only after his death, only to me, only when the moment was right. He had been protecting me from Derek, from Kaylee, from the particular kind of harm that comes not from strangers but from family who have decided what you owe them. I sat in that vault room for a long time. Then I took photographs of every document with my phone. I placed everything back exactly as I found it, locked the box, and returned it to Robert Ellison. I asked him to note in the bank's records that I had accessed the box alone and to flag any attempt by any other party to access it. He nodded as though he had been expecting this request. I drove home on the interstate with both hands on the wheel, the radio off, thinking. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I understood the full shape of what I was facing. It wasn't just grief anymore, and it wasn't just money. It was a choice about what kind of woman I intended to be, the one who let herself be managed, or the one Walter believed I was when he wrote, "I'm sorry it took me so long to be brave enough." That afternoon, Derek called. His tone was light, casual, the studied ease of someone trying not to seem impatient. He mentioned again that Kaylee's lawyer friend was available anytime. He mentioned that he was just keeping an eye on things, and that I shouldn't have to deal with all the paperwork alone. I told him I appreciated it. I kept my voice warm. I was already dialing Patricia Odom before the call ended. Patricia Odom had a small office above a dry cleaning shop on Fenmore Street, the kind of space where everything was slightly mismatched, but everything worked. She was 63, wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and had the unhurried confidence of a woman who had spent 30 years watching people underestimate her. She was the right person for this. I laid everything out on her desk, the photographs of the ledger, the deed, the statements, Walter's letters. I watched her read. She asked me 3 clarifying questions. Then she sat back and was quiet for a moment, in the way she always was when she was thinking hard. "Walter was smart," she said finally. "He was. The account is legally yours. The deed transfers cleanly under the will. There's no ambiguity here, Margaret. He set this up carefully." She tapped the photograph of the ledger. "What you're describing with Derek and his wife isn't a legal threat yet, but it could become one if you're not ahead of it." We spent 2 hours together that afternoon. By the end of it, I had a plan. Patricia would file for formal probate on all assets, including the previously undisclosed ones, with full documentation. Everything would be made legal, transparent, and ironclad, but transferred solely into my name. The Indiana property would be professionally appraised. The investment accounts would be consolidated under my management with a financial advisor Patricia trusted. And critically, we would create a formal record that I had sought independent legal counsel, that I had been advised fully and freely, and that no other party had been involved in my decisions. This last piece was the shield. Over the following 2 weeks, I executed each step quietly and steadily. I met with the financial advisor, a calm woman named Sandra Briggs, and reviewed every account. I signed the necessary documents at Patricia's office. I had the Indiana property assessed. I did all of this while continuing to answer Derek's calls warmly, listening to his gentle suggestions and saying nothing. It was Kaylee who figured it out first. I should have expected that. She called on a Wednesday afternoon, and her voice had changed. The practiced warmth was gone, replaced by something brittle and direct. She said she had heard from someone at First Merchant Trust, she didn't say who, that I had visited the bank and met with the branch manager. She said she didn't want to make assumptions, but that she and Derek felt they had a right to be involved in any major financial decisions. She used the phrase family decisions 3 times. I kept my voice even. I said that Walter had left me as sole executor and that I was handling matters appropriately with legal counsel. I said she was welcome to have her own attorney review the probate filing when it was submitted as public record. I was polite. I was immovable. 20 minutes later, Derek called. He was not as controlled as Kaylee. His voice had that particular tightness it got when he felt cornered. I had heard it before, when he was a teenager, and I recognized it now for what it was. Not anger exactly, but fear dressed as anger. He said I was being secretive. He said Dad would have wanted him involved. He said he had rights as the only heir. "I'm not gone yet, Derek," I said quietly. "And neither is Walter's will, which names me as sole beneficiary. You're welcome to verify that." There was a pause. Then he said something I had not expected. Said it in a low, flat voice that didn't sound like my son at all. "We know about the box, Mom. We know it's more than what was in the will. If you're not going to be reasonable, we're going to have to look at whether Dad was in the right state of mind when he set this up." Mental incapacity. They were going to challenge the estate on the grounds that Walter had not been competent. My hands were cold. My voice was not. "That's your right," I said. "Patricia Odom is my attorney. Her number is publicly listed. Any communication from this point should go through her." I hung up. I won't pretend I was unafraid. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after, and I cried. Not from weakness, but from the particular grief of watching your child become someone you don't recognize. The fear was real, but underneath it was something harder, the memory of Walter's letter. I'm sorry it took me so long to be brave enough. He had been afraid too. He had still done the right thing. I could do no less. Patricia was unruffled when I called her. She said a mental incapacity challenge without medical evidence was almost certainly unwinnable, and that she would formally respond to any such filing. She advised me to document all contact from Derek and Kaylee going forward. I gave myself 5 days. I went to my sister Carol's house in Columbus. I walked her dog. I ate her cooking. I slept 8 hours a night. I let myself be someone's little sister for a few days instead of a widow navigating a siege. When I came back, I was ready. The first move came the day after I returned from Carol's. A flower arrangement arrived at my door, lilies and white roses, the expensive kind. The card read, "Mom, we love you. We were out of line. Can we start over? Derek and Kaylee." I put the flowers on the kitchen counter and looked at them for a while. They were beautiful. That was, I understood, precisely the point. Kaylee called that evening. Her voice was soft again, reconstructed into warmth. She said they'd been under so much stress, that losing Walter had hit Derek harder than he'd let on, that she was sorry for the things that were said. She asked if I would come to Sunday dinner. She said Derek wanted to talk, just to clear the air. She said, gently, that maybe we could find a solution that worked for everyone, that there was surely enough for the whole family, and that there was no reason for things to be adversarial. Enough for the whole family. There it was. The flowers were a down payment on a different kind of conversation, one where I would sit at her table and be gently, lovingly persuaded to share what Walter had legally and deliberately left to me alone. I thanked her for the flowers. I said I needed more time. I kept my voice warm, unhurried, impossible to argue with. When I set the phone down, I felt something I hadn't expected. Clarity. Not the anxious, effortful clarity of someone working hard to stay calm, but the quiet, settled kind. The kind that comes when you have stopped hoping the situation will resolve itself and have accepted that you are the one who will resolve it. I was not angry at Kaylee. Anger would have been easier in some ways, cleaner. What I felt was more like the specific sadness of seeing a thing for exactly what it is. I threw the flowers away, not from spite. I simply didn't want them in my house. That week, I did something I should have done months earlier. I called people. I called my neighbor Ruth Pemberton, who had been checking in on me since the funeral, and whom I had been politely deflecting. I called my friend Donna Marsh, who had been widowed 6 years before, and who I knew understood certain things without being told. I called my pastor, Reverend Cole, not for spiritual counsel exactly, but for the company of someone whose intentions I trusted completely. And I called my granddaughter, Ellie, Derek and Kaylee's daughter, 24 years old and living in Portland, who had texted me quietly 2 weeks prior. "Grandma, I don't know what's going on, but if you need anything, please call me." I had not called Ellie because I hadn't wanted to put her in the middle, but her text had stayed with me. It told me that whatever was happening in that household, it wasn't unanimous. Ellie picked up on the second ring. We talked for an hour. She was careful. She didn't criticize her parents directly. But she confirmed, in the quiet way of someone choosing words precisely, that there had been a lot of conversation in her parents' house about money and about what Grandpa had left behind. She said she hadn't been comfortable with it. She said she was glad I called. I didn't ask her to take sides. I just asked her to stay in my life. She said she wasn't going anywhere. Ruth came over for coffee twice that week. Donna and I took a walk along the river path on Thursday morning. Reverend Cole stopped by on Friday with 2 pieces of pie from the church fundraiser. None of these people knew the details. I kept that close. But their presence reminded me of something important. I was not isolated. I was not alone. Derek and Kaylee had perhaps imagined that a widow in her late 60s, still fogged by grief, would be easy to press into a corner. They had not accounted for the fact that I had built a life with real people in it. From Patricia's reports, Derek and Kaylee had gone quiet on the legal front. No formal challenge had been filed. Whether they were waiting, regrouping, or genuinely reconsidering, I didn't know. But the silence felt less like peace than like a held breath. I used the time carefully. I reviewed all the financial documents Sandra Briggs had organized. I updated my own will, quietly, with Patricia, to reflect the full estate and to formalize a bequest to Ellie, should she want it someday, independent of her parents. I arranged for the Indiana property to be placed under professional management. I consolidated the investment accounts. Piece by piece, I built a wall. Not from anger. From Walter's instructions carried out the way he would have carried them out. Carefully, completely, without leaving anything open. Derek and Kaylee were watching. I could feel it, the way you feel weather before it arrives. But I had stopped being afraid of the storm. They came on a Saturday morning in late June, 3 weeks after the flowers. I saw Derek's car in the driveway from the upstairs window and felt my stomach tighten before I reminded myself, "You are ready for this." I went downstairs, put the kettle on, and opened the door with a composed face. Kaylee was carrying a bakery box. Croissants from the good place on Riverside, the ones I'd always loved. She was dressed carefully, just casually enough to suggest she hadn't tried. Derek looked tired. There was something around his eyes that might have been genuine exhaustion. And for a moment, I felt the mother in me lean toward it, toward the familiar reflex of comfort. He had Walter's jaw, Walter's broad shoulders, and in that morning light, standing on my porch, he looked more like his father than he had in years. I held that observation at arm's length and stepped back to let them in. I served coffee. I set the croissants on a plate. We sat at the kitchen table where I had read Walter's letter, where I had made my decisions, where I had cried and steadied myself. I knew every scratch on that table. It was my table. I sat at the head of it. Kaylee opened gently. She talked about how hard the last few months had been, about how grief distorts everything and makes people do things they regret. She talked about family. How at the end of the day, family is all any of us have. She talked about Walter. warmly, recounting a memory of him teaching Derek to change a tire that was almost certainly embellished. She was skilled. I will give her that. She had the gift of making a rehearsed thing sound spontaneous, of wearing sincerity the way some people wear a good coat, convincingly on any occasion. Then, by gradations so smooth they might have been imperceptible to someone less prepared, the conversation shifted. She mentioned that she and Derek had been speaking to a family mediator. Not a lawyer, she was quick to clarify. Just someone who helped families work through difficult transitions. She suggested that a mediated conversation might be healthier than going through attorneys. She said the word attorneys the way one says disease. She said that Walter surely hadn't intended to create conflict, that he would have wanted harmony. She said that perhaps there were ways to honor his legacy together. I noticed that she never once asked how I was doing. Not in passing, not as filler. In 45 minutes of careful conversation, my well-being did not come up. Derek, who had been quiet, leaned forward. His voice was lower than Kaylee's, more direct. He said he wasn't trying to take anything from me. He said he just wanted to feel like his father had thought about him, had cared about his future. His voice cracked slightly on the word father, and I watched it happen, and I held my own reaction carefully in both hands, the way you hold something fragile. Because here was the thing. I believed, on some level, that the pain was real. Derek had lost his father. Whatever Kaylee had shaped him into, that loss was genuine. And Kaylee, perhaps, had her own fears about the future that were not entirely cynical. But genuine pain does not entitle anyone to someone else's property. And the structure of this conversation, the croissants, the mediator, the carefully modulated emotion, was not the structure of reconciliation. It was the structure of a negotiation where one party had been set up to feel that saying no was cruelty. I had taught second grade for 22 years. I knew how to recognize when someone was being managed toward a predetermined answer. I let them finish. I didn't rush them. I let every word land and settle. Then I folded my hands on the table. I love you, Derek, I said. I will always love you. That's not in question. I looked at him steadily. But I'm not going to discuss the estate outside of proper legal channels. That's not because I'm hostile to you. It's because your father asked me to handle things carefully, and I intend to do that. Kaylee's expression shifted. Just a flicker. Quickly managed, but I saw it. The adjustment from warm persuasion to something colder. Like watching a stage light change color. Mom. Derek's voice had changed too, the crack gone now, replaced by the flat tightness I recognized. Do you understand that if you refuse to work with us, we will file the incapacity challenge? Do you know how that will look? A woman your age, making major financial decisions alone, refusing her own family's involvement? There it was, the mask removed. I understand, I said. Patricia Odom has already prepared a response. I suggest you speak with your own attorney before you decide to proceed. We have documentation, Kaylee said. Her voice was precise now, controlled. We have correspondence from the last year of Walter's life that suggests he was not always clear-minded. We have people who will testify. I don't know what I expected to feel in that moment. Fear, perhaps, or rage. What I felt instead was a sudden, cold stillness, the kind that comes not from detachment, but from absolute certainty. I knew they were bluffing. I knew it because Walter had been meticulously documented by his physicians, because Robert Ellison had met with him regularly and would attest to his clarity, because the box itself was organized with the precision of a fully capable mind. Whatever they had, it was not enough. And I suspected they knew it too. that this threat was a last pressure point, deployed because all the softer ones had failed. "Then file," I said. They left without finishing their coffee. Kaylee picked up her purse with the particular controlled movement of someone suppressing something larger. Derek didn't look at me on the way out. Not from cruelty, I thought, but from shame. That was the part that stayed with me after the door closed. I stood at the kitchen window and watched Derek's car back out of the driveway. My heart was beating fast. I won't pretend otherwise. There is something uniquely frightening about being threatened by your own child, by someone whose first steps you watched, whose nightmares you sat with, whose face you know better than almost any other face in the world. The fear was real. It moved through me like cold water. But so was something else. Something Walter had understood, had tried to describe in his letter, had left me the tools to feel for myself. The fear was not undoing me. It was clarifying me. Every threat they made tightened my resolve another degree, like a bolt being set. I thought, if they were certain they could win this, they would not have come here with croissants. I called Patricia. "They threatened to file," I said. "Let them," she said. "We're ready." I believed her. I believed myself. I put the leftover croissants in a bag and took them to Ruth next door, because I didn't want them in my house either. The incapacity challenge was filed on a Monday morning in July. Patricia called me before I'd finished my coffee to tell me it had arrived. And she sounded the way she always sounded. Precise, unruffled, faintly satisfied. Like a chess player watching an opponent make the move she'd been expecting. "They filed a petition with the probate court," she told me, alleging that Walter suffered from cognitive decline in his final years, and that the undisclosed assets were accumulated in a state of diminished capacity. They're asking for the estate to be redistributed under standard intestate succession, which would mean approximately half to you, half to Derek. "What's our position?" I asked, though I already knew. "Strong," she said, "very strong. I've spent the last month building it." The hearing was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Patricia filed our formal response, a comprehensive package of documentation that included Walter's medical records from the last 3 years of his life. Records that showed cognitive evaluations performed by his cardiologist and his primary care physician, both of whom had found no evidence of impairment. It included a signed letter from Robert Ellison at First Merchant Trust, attesting that he had met with Walter quarterly for the past decade and had observed no confusion, no unusual behavior, no signs of diminished capacity. It included copies of the ledger from the safety deposit box, showing entries made as recently as 8 weeks before Walter's death. Methodical, dated, internally consistent, the work of an organized and competent mind. Each entry was dated, cross-referenced, and totaled with the precision of a man who had been paying careful attention for decades. A person in cognitive decline does not maintain a ledger like that. Anyone who looked at it would understand that immediately. It also included something Patricia had gathered quietly over the previous weeks that I had not known about until she showed it to me the day before the hearing. Kaylee had made a mistake. In her early conversations with the mediator she had contacted, who was, it emerged, not a neutral party, but someone she had used before in a business dispute, she had sent several emails outlining her strategy. Those emails had been forwarded inadvertently to a third party with ties to someone in Patricia's professional network. I won't speculate on how Patricia came to have them. She told me they were legally obtained, and that was enough for me. What they contained was Kaylee's own words, written before any pretense of reconciliation, describing the undisclosed assets as leverage we can use, discussing the mediator plan as a way to get her to the table before she lawyers up fully, and referring to me in one remarkable sentence as the soft target. I read those emails 3 times. I thought about the croissants. I thought about Kaylee's warm voice on the phone, her careful dress, her embellished story about Walter and the tire. All of it planned, all of it written down in advance, in her own words, in a document that now existed in the world regardless of what she wished. Then I set the emails down. I didn't cry. There was nothing left in me to spend on Kaylee's opinion of me. What I felt was something closer to the quiet, final click of a lock engaging, the sound of a thing being exactly what it had always been, now confirmed. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. Navy blue blazer, good slacks, the small pearl earrings Walter had given me for our 30th anniversary. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a composed woman of 68 who knew what she was doing and had documentation to prove it. The courtroom was small and procedural. These probate hearings usually are. No jury, no gallery to speak of. Just the judge, the attorneys, a court reporter, and us. Derek and Kaylee were already seated when I arrived, their attorney between them like a seam holding two things together. Derek looked at me when I walked in. For a moment his face was unreadable, something moving behind it that I couldn't name. Then he looked away. Kaylee did not look at me at all. She was studying a document in front of her with the focused intensity of someone who has decided that eye contact is a concession she cannot afford. Patricia presented our case with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this many times and had no need to perform. She walked the judge through the medical records, through Ellison's letter, through the ledger. She noted the logical impossibility of the incapacity claim given the documentation. She was methodical, unhurried, and utterly convincing. The way the truth usually is when it's properly assembled. Then she introduced the emails. That was when things became disorderly. The moment Kaylee's attorney saw the emails, he asked for a recess. The judge granted 10 minutes. During that recess, I sat still and watched a crack run through Derek and Kaylee's composed front. Kaylee was speaking to her attorney in a low, rapid voice, her hand moving in tight gestures. Derek was not looking at anyone. He was sitting very still in the way people sit when something inside them has gone quiet. Not calm, but emptied. I recognized it. I had sat that way myself in the garage, holding an envelope I hadn't yet opened. When the hearing resumed, Kaylee's attorney requested a continuance to review new materials. The judge denied it. There was a flatness to the denial that left no room for argument. Derek took the stand briefly. Patricia cross-examined him about specific conversations he had claimed demonstrated his father's confusion. She asked him to date those conversations. She asked him to describe them specifically. He couldn't. Not because he was lying about everything. I believe he genuinely remembered moments of his father being tired, being ill, being slower than he used to be. But he had allowed Kaylee to build a legal argument on what were, in truth, an old man's bad days, not cognitive decline. The architecture of her strategy required those bad days to mean more than they did. Under cross-examination, they collapsed back to their actual size. At one point, he said haltingly, "My father. I just think he wasn't himself at the end," Patricia said gently. "Did you discuss your concerns about your father's mental state with any of his physicians while he was alive?" A pause that lasted long enough for the court reporter's fingers to stop moving. "No," Derek said. "Did you contact his cardiologist or his primary care physician or any medical professional with these concerns?" "No." "Did you mention these concerns to your mother at any point during your father's illness?" A longer pause. Derek's jaw moved slightly, the way it had when he was a boy and was working out whether to tell the truth about something. "No," he said. So these concerns about your father's mental capacity arose after his death, Patricia said. It was not a question. Yes, thank you, Patricia said. Nothing further. The judge ruled that afternoon. The petition was denied in its entirety. Walter's estate remained exactly as filed, wholly in my name, exactly as he had intended. The judge noted in his brief remarks that the evidence of Walter Hay's mental acuity was thorough and consistent, and that the petition had been inadequately supported by credible evidence and undermined by the timing and circumstances of its filing. That last phrase, the timing and circumstances, was a small, precise cut that I suspected Kaylee understood more fully than anyone else in the room. Patricia shook my hand in the corridor. Her grip was firm and brief. I thanked her. Then I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat for a long while, and let myself exhale. A long, slow exhale that felt like it had been waiting months to happen. Outside the window, the July afternoon was bright and ordinary. Pigeons on the courthouse steps, a man eating a sandwich on a bench, the world continuing, indifferent to verdicts. Then I drove home. There was nothing dramatic about it. That was the right ending for this particular chapter. Quiet, complete, ordinary. Walter would have appreciated that. The week after the hearing, the consequences arrived in pieces, each one quieter than the scene that had preceded it. Patricia informed me that Kaylee's attorney had submitted a formal withdrawal from the case. The emails had not been introduced as evidence of anything criminal. There was no crime, technically, in strategizing aggressively about an inheritance dispute. But their contents had been referenced by the judge in his remarks about the circumstances of the petition, and they were now part of the public court record. Public record. Kaylee had written the words "soft target" in an email that was now findable by anyone who looked. She had written leverage we can use about a widow's grief. Whatever private justifications she had built around her own behavior, the public version of it was now fixed in documents that didn't care about her justifications at all. I did not orchestrate what happened next. I want to be clear about that. I had not contacted the press or Kaylee's employer or anyone in their social circle. I had, in fact, specifically asked Patricia to keep the proceedings as quiet as possible. What happened was the natural consequence of a court record in a small enough community, among people who paid attention to such things. Kaylee worked as a senior project manager at a mid-sized consulting firm. One of the partners at that firm, it emerged, had a professional connection to someone involved in the case. The emails had made an impression, not because of their legal implications, but because of what they revealed about how Kaylee thought about people and about vulnerability. Within a month of the ruling, Kaylee was put on a performance review. Not for anything related to the case officially, but the timing was not lost on anyone who knew the sequence. The review did not go well. By September, she had been quietly transitioned out of her position. She did not find comparable work quickly. The professional world in a mid-sized city is smaller than it looks, and reputations move through it like weather. Not always fair, but consistent. I heard this from Donna, who heard it from someone else, as these things travel. I received the information with the specific sadness I had come to associate with everything Kaylee related. I had never wanted her humiliated. I had only wanted what Walter had left me. That those two things turned out to be connected was her doing, not mine. I did not celebrate it. I noted it, the way you note weather. Derek called me once, 2 weeks after the hearing. It was the most painful phone call of everything that had happened, and I include in that category the calls in which he had threatened me. He was not angry this time. He was something worse. Defeated. His voice was flat, shorn of the strategic inflections Kaylee usually calibrated in him. He sounded, for the first time in years, like himself. The self underneath all the layers that had been added and adjusted and redirected by someone who had needed him to be a particular kind of instrument. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't fully understood what he was doing. He said he'd let someone else do his thinking for him and that he knew it wasn't an excuse. But he wanted me to know he understood that now. He said he'd been thinking about Walter, about who his father actually was, apart from what Kaylee had told him his father's money meant. I listened to all of it without interrupting. I let him speak until he had said everything he needed to say. There is a particular patience that mothers develop, the kind that can hold a long silence without filling it. "I know," I said when he was finished. "I know you're sorry, Derek." "Are we okay?" he asked. The question was so small, so naked, that I felt the years fall away and heard my boy's voice in it. The one from before Kaylee, before the money, before all of it. The boy who had cried at sad movies and remembered birthdays. "We're not okay right now," I said carefully, "but I'm not done with you. Do you understand what I mean by that?" A long pause, the kind where someone is deciding whether they deserve what's being offered. "Yes," he said. "Then give it time," I said, "and go talk to someone, a real someone, not a mediator Kaylee hired. Someone who'll tell you the truth even when it's uncomfortable." He said he would. He said it quietly, without the performing quality his voice had carried for years. Whether he did at that point was his own business. I had said what was mine to say. I was not his therapist. I was his mother, and those are not the same thing, though the line can blur. Kaylee did not call. I had not expected her to. The financial matters closed out cleanly, without drama. Sandra Briggs managed the investment consolidation without a single complication. She was exactly the steady, competent professional Patricia had promised. The Indiana property was transferred into my name cleanly and was generating modest but reliable rental income by October. Every account was settled, every document filed and confirmed. The estate was fully mine. Not in the grasping sense, not the way Kaylee had wanted things for herself, but in the sense that it was exactly where Walter had placed it, with exactly the intention he had carried for 11 years. A life's careful work, passed to the person he had trusted with it. Patricia sent me a final bill, which was reasonable, and a handwritten note on her firm's stationery that said simply, "Walter chose well." I framed it and hung it in the study, next to the window that looked out over the vegetable garden I was slowly bringing back to life. Not from vanity, because it was something I needed to see on hard days, and because it was the cleanest summary of everything that had happened. A man who had known his wife, had trusted her, had been right. I intended to be worthy of it for whatever years I had left. I went to the bank one final time and closed the safe deposit box. I took the ledger home. I put it in the top drawer of Walter's old desk, in the small study off the hallway. I didn't display it. I didn't need to. I knew what it represented. 41 years of partnership, the last 11 of which had included a secret kept for love, passed forward in trust at exactly the right moment. He had been brave enough in the end. I thought about that every time I opened that drawer. By the time October turned to November, I had begun to recognize my life again. Not the one I'd had with Walter, which was gone and irreplaceable, but the life that was left, which was still, I discovered, quite a lot. I booked a trip to Savannah with Carol. We drove down in her car, stopping when we wanted, eating at diners that had no reason to be as good as they were. I walked along the river and felt, for the first time in a year, something like uncomplicated pleasure. The feeling of being somewhere beautiful, unhurried, with nothing requiring my attention but the light on the water. I had the front porch repainted in the sage green Walter had once pointed to approvingly in a magazine. Ruth said it transformed the whole block. I joined a watercolor class at the community center that Carol had been nudging me toward for a decade. I was not talented. I went every Tuesday anyway. The rental income from Indiana gave me a financial ease I had never had before. Not extravagance, just the absence of low-level anxiety that had been the background noise of my entire adult life. I donated a portion to the church building fund. I set aside an amount in a separate account with Ellie's name on it to be given to her when she turned 30. Ellie came for Thanksgiving. She drove from Portland with her bag and a bottle of good wine and the particular quality of attention that young people rarely give older ones. We cooked together. We talked. She told me, carefully, that her parents had separated. She said it without editorializing. I listened without commenting. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the particular sadness of watching two people discover that choices have weight. Kaylee had lost her position at the consulting firm by September. She did not find comparable work quickly. I heard this from Donna and received it with the same sadness. I had never wanted her humiliated. I had only ever wanted what Walter had left me. As for Derek, by December his calls had become more like my son again. He had started therapy. He was not asking for anything, not the estate, not forgiveness on a timeline. He was just calling, and I was answering. I won't wrap that neatly. Rebuilding looks like a long series of ordinary Tuesday calls that accumulate, slowly, into trust. On Christmas Eve, I sat in Walter's study with a glass of eggnog and took the ledger from the drawer. I traced the first entry with my finger, March 14th, 2003, and thought about a man who had carried something invisible for decades, trusting that I would know what to do with it. I had known, eventually. I closed the ledger, finished my eggnog, and went to put cookies out for my grandnieces arriving in the morning, with their noise and their beautiful, uncomplicated energy. My life was smaller in some ways. In the ways that mattered, it was not smaller at all. I learned something I want to say plainly. Trust is not naivety. Walter trusted me with open eyes after 41 years of knowing exactly who I was. And grief is not weakness. Anyone who looks at a widow and sees soft target has made a fatal mistake about the nature of loss. Walter was brave enough to protect me. I was brave enough to honor it. What would you have done if this story moved you? If you've ever faced a family that mistook your grief for surrender, leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs it. Thank you for listening.